Your Aunt Gladys called. You haven't seen Gladys for 6 months, but she needs some help. She's got a little old house 40 miles away, and she said she can't handle some of these things by herself, so you're ready to go out there and solve her problems. Problem is, you don't know what you're going to confront, so you grab a bucket full of tools. Now, you're not a pro, you don't do this for a living, but you're handy. Here's what you might put into your bucket to solve your aunt's problems. Now, let me just throw this out there. These are not the only tools you might need, but I think these might deal with almost anything in terms of light-duty home repair. Item 1, you're going to need some kind of a saw. You may have to go down to Lowe's or Home Depot and get a board to fix something on her porch. Get some kind of a saw because, doggone it, sometimes you need to cut. Sometimes you might have to tear something apart. Now, this is not the finest pry bar in the world. This is called a wonder bar or a door bar, but it'll do a lot of stuff and it doesn't take much space. And this bucket will go in the front of your Geo Metro if you're careful. So the reason you would grab a wonder bar and not some of the other bars is because of how thin it presents itself. It gets right down to nothing. You can slide that between a piece of baseboard and the wall, tap it down there, and get in without tearing the world apart. It'll get a hold of a finish nail and extract it without putting a big bruise on a door jamb. And you can put that under the edge of a door, put your toe on it, and hold a strain on the door in order to get the hinge pin out or the hinge pin back in if you've got a jimmy or hickey a hinge and just clean up, a door won't latch. These are a nice little door bar and they will get you out of trouble in ways that you haven't even thought of yet. Now, a hammer, you got to have a hammer. This is not my stiletto. I'm not going to be doing any framing or construction or driving no big nails are going to be driven. But if I have to drive a nail, this little guy will. This belonged to my wife's stepdad, Bill Comerford, pro sign painter, and I love that man, and I think of him every time I see it laying around. So this configuration is kind of a finish hammer rather than a goat head, with the straighter claws. This is just a little more civilized. You can get in and pull a nail easier. And the fulcrum, the point of contact, rolls around the head of the hammer instead of going immediately to the front where it will bruise or cause a dent. I mean, if you're halfway careful, you can pull a nail out without any collateral damage. All right, a clamp. You got to have some kind of a clamp. This was the one I had in my shop that would fit in a bucket, but it may not be your best choice. There are quick grip type clamps. I'm in the market for some, by the way, that will reverse. So you can push with the clamp or pull with the clamp. So think those thoughts, but when you go over to Gladys's place, you ought to take some kind of a clamp. You may need to clamp up a glue joint. Who knows what you're going to need to clamp? Clamps a brace, temporary brace to a post out on our garden fence to hold it up while you're doing what you're doing. Take at least one, some kind of a clamp. This is item number 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's just assume that there's going to be some tile that needs to be caulked in the bathroom, around the toilet. Maybe you've got to reset the toilet. I don't know, but you better have a caulking gun. This particular type I've been happy with. It's kind of a dripless kind of a thing. It's got a spout cutter. That's handy. It's got a prong that you can get in there and break the seal inside a tube of caulking if that's the type of caulking it is. So I'm not going to get into the weeds on caulking guns because I don't like caulking or painting, but take something with you and Gladys is going to be glad you've got it. So let me pull this beauty out. We did a video on buzz saws, fine saws. I mean, they've got a dozen names and 6 dozen uses. If you've got one of these guys and an assortment of blades, you almost don't have to bring the skill saw. Now you've got to have a skill saw, but there are so many. For instance, maybe you've got to replace some tile and pull some thin set off from behind a failed tile, but it's a small space. You can't get a chisel, you can't do anything, but you can put a fine saw in there with a putty knife attachment, not this blade, and scrape. You can remove things, you can cut things. These are a magic tool. Now here, I debated on not bringing both these to the party. Number one, this Rufus is no longer available. The guys that brought this to market in Australia have had some problems and they are not readily available, but if you can find one of these, highly recommend it. The vials for leveling are so accurate and so easy that you almost don't have to bring a level. But, I mean, you can't leave town without a level, and you need some kind of a square. So figure that out and make sure you've got them in your bucket. So you may not be aware of all the things you can do with a tri-square. This is a very sophisticated and improved tri-square. But it's set at 1 3/8 because I was using it as a gauge for marking the distance on a mortise on my workbench. You can use it as a scribe. If I want to scribe a line 3/8 of an inch down the edge of an iron beam, you see that? I don't have to mark a straight edge on there. I can scribe a straight edge on there. So scribing, gauging, marking, leveling, squaring, and on this particular Jim Dandy, you can even set roof pitches. So keep that in mind. Before we bounce off of this, keep in mind that square off of plumb is level, okay? Square off of level is plumb. So levels and squares are brothers, baby. I mean, they're two sides of the same coin, and you've got to have a way to interchange and use both. Gladys is counting on it. All right, getting down in here, a little further into the weeds, I would put in a pair of tin snips. Whisters is as good as you can buy. These are straights. You have green handles, red handles, and yellow handles indicating right cut, left cut, and straight cut, or vice versa. But you ought to bring something along, so if you need to cut a little piece of flashing, or, I don't know, cut a pop can in half to drop in somewhere to catch a leak, I don't know. But when you need a pair of tin snips, nothing else is going to do it. And speaking of leaks and plumbing, I was going to put a crescent wrench in here. Yes, I mean, wrenches are great. And if you're a mechanic, this is not the bucket full of tools you bring. But man, Knipex, see, I got the pronunciation right this time, boys. Whether it's these or the Cobra, I've got a set of these now. But these are, in my opinion, an indispensably versatile tool. And if you've got to get into the bathroom space or under the sink, this is going to do about 90% of anything a plumber's ever going to need to do. So we included this in a previous video, but I like the Knipex because of how easily operated the difference in opening size is. The Cobras are even more so. And you see it's a super strong joint. It's not just a standard plier where the two halves are connected through a rivet. This is a boxed kind of a plier joint. And it's strong and it adjusts. And then finally, those jaws have got a way to get a hold of anything from a pipe to the head of a bolt in a very secure way. You're not likely to strip anything with a pair of Knipex. Closely related but fundamentally different, you ought to have a pair of vice grips. Who knows? This is a small clamp. This is an aid to getting the brass nuts off of the toilet bolts, the T-bolts on the toilet. There's any number of things when you're going to look over your shoulder and say, Gladys, if you got a vice grip around here, bring your own. So Knipex are pliers. They're world class, but they're not handy for electrical work, and they're lousy for tying rebar. I mean, wiring things together and tightening them up. So these are the pliers I love. I've got probably 4 sets. They're wire tying pliers. I mean, form setters, iron workers have got these. There are fist fights over whether channel lock or Klein are the best. Not a good reason for a fist fight. But if you've got to do a little electrical work or cut some wire or rehang a picture, you need something like this. And if you are going to do electrical work, there's something else you better have. And it's some sort of a tester. Now this is not exhaustive. The battery's probably dead yet. Nope, look at that. It'll tell me. These things will tell you if there are electrons ready to conduct and bite you. So get something like this. I'm not advocating for this exact one, but if you're going to do any electrical work, you're going to have some way to test the circuit. Okay, I can see the bottom of the bucket. I don't have a putty knife in here because I put a wood chisel in there. I mean, this is sort of a multi-tool, right? It'll cut, it'll scrape, it'll smooth, dap, it'll scrape off paint. So if you're minimizing your tool load, put a chisel in there and make sure it's at least reasonably sharp. Got to have a pencil. Carry that in your pocket so it may not actually count to the load of the bucket. You better have a stud finder of some kind. I've been real pleased with this zircon. Maybe pleased enough to recommend it. Seems to actually work, unlike some stud finders. Tape measure. Love Stanley. We've got videos on tape measures. Let me just show you this. Some people, some poor souls, think that that is a defect. You see how that hook slides, and you think, well, is that broken? Do I need to tighten up? No, you don't tighten up those rivets. That hook slides by exactly the thickness of the hook. So an inside measurement is accurate and an outside measurement is accurate. This is why the old carpenters didn't trust steel tapes, because the hook was rigid. And the difference between inside and outside was always off, in this case by, a 32nd of an inch. And sometimes a 32nd of an inch matters. All right, now here's the one that I like the least. And it's a paintbrush. And I hate painting. And there are, in fact, ordinances in Douglas County that make it, frankly, against the law for Cy Swan to ever pick up a paintbrush. You can't let that guy paint anything. It's all over the place. But you might have to at Gladys's. And even if you don't paint, there's nothing like a reasonably clean paintbrush to help you clean up a little mess, if she's fussy. All right. This and this and this, I'm counting as one tool. You better take some kind of a drill. You better have some bits, different screw tips, different size, at least small drill bits. Cordless drills and drill drivers have changed everything about construction. I'm just happy to live in an age where these things exist. I've got boxes of kits of bits, and I don't take care of them. I use them. They end up in different places. I'm not even going to show you the inside of that one, but I'll show you this one, because in general, I kind of like Irwin. They seem to be more well thought out. That's pretty good shape. In fact, it's only missing a couple of, that's wrong, but we don't care. So it's incredible how inexpensive these kits are now. DeWalt and Makita and everybody makes kits of accessories to go with these guys, because the world now depends fundamentally on cordless drills and drill drivers, and we have a video on the difference. A chalk line. In this case, about as simple as a chalk line can be. Irwin again, I like them. But the unique thing about this chalk line is it's full of white chalk. That string is impregnated with white chalk. Why, you ask? Because you can use white chalk inside a house and you're not creating a stain. Red chalk is permanent. Blue chalk is a mess. Maybe you have to snap a line across a doorway, across some carpet. I don't know, maybe you have to maybe you've got to put a new a grab bar, a long stair railing, and you got to snap a line on drywall. Don't do it with blue, do it with white. You can see it well enough and you can wipe it right off. Now besides that, a chalk line will compensate for having only a 12-inch long level, which is what we brought. Because a chalk line is also a plumb bob, or at least these are. See that? Elementary, my dear Watson, but sometimes you can stretch out a longer definition of plumb with a plumb bob than you can with anything else. Maybe you bring a utility knife, or maybe you just rely on your Leatherman. Because, by the way, I'm not counting a Leatherman because it's always in my pocket, but there's about a dozen tools right there. So don't sell short a multi-tool when you're in a minimalist kind of a tool condition. But if you don't have one, or if you don't want to mess up the tip of your knife, cutting open, I don't know, X, Y, or Z, throw in a utility knife. So the last item in this list is the smallest. The only thing that's lighter is the pencil. It's a nail set, and that's a handy thing to have. Now these are made to countersink to set finish nails. This is kind of a medium size. You see that divot right there? A finish nail slips into there, so you stay on the head of it, and you can punch it down below the level of the surface of the board so you can fill the hole. Whatever you've got to drill, it is a bit of a center punch. Now, not exactly, but you can get in and you can punch things down. You can get them below the surface. I don't know, I can visualize that it might shim something up. There's more going on here than you think in terms of metallurgy. The end of this is soft so that it will upset or mushroom and not chip off. This end of it is hard. That's magic. The way they do that is something we'll talk about in a blacksmithing video. That's a very elegant piece of machining. I just can't hardly believe that they can make things and sell them for, what, $1.95? That's the advantage of living in the modern age, I guess. So find some kind of a good old nail set, load up your bucket, head up the road, and enjoy it. If whoever it is that you're helping is there to help, instead of being frustrated by them looking over your shoulder, just look at it as a chance to invest in something that's way more important than whatever house you're working on. It's a relationship that you're trying to strengthen. That's a big deal. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.